First off, let's discuss the difference between a sign and a symptom. A symptom can only be described by the person feeling it. No one else can tell. For instance, with botulism, a symptom that the patient may experience will be double vision or blurred vision. No one else can tell that they are experiencing or that they have double vision or blurred vision but the patient. A sign, on the other hand, can be seen or read by somebody else. An example may be a slurred speech or a weak cry in an infant with botulism. Now, some of the signs and symptoms of botulism that one may get are double vision, blurred vision, drooping eyelids, as you can tell in the bottom left picture in the screen. They may have slurred speech, difficulty swallowing, a thick feeling tongue, dry mouth, muscle weakness, and/or paralysis. Infant botulism has slightly different signs and symptoms. They may appear lethargic, have flat facial expressions, they may feed poorly, are constipated, they may have a weak cry, breathing problems, they might have poor muscle tone, like they appear floppy, as you can tell in the bottom right-hand picture of the screen, or they can suffer from paralysis as well. These signs and symptoms may not occur all at once, and they can occur as soon as 6 hours after the exposure or up to 10 days after the exposure. If someone infected with botulism goes untreated, they may worsen to the point of paralysis of breathing muscles, which will ultimately lead to death. One good thing about botulism is that it is not a disease that is transmitted from person to person, meaning just because you know someone that has botulism does not mean that you are going to be diagnosed with it as well. As discussed earlier, there are different forms of botulism. The three main types are foodborne, infant, and wound botulism. According to the CDC, botulism cases are classified as other if the patient with confirmed botulism is not an infant, has no history of ingesting a suspect food, and has no wounds. These cases are extremely rare. The only other botulism type we will be talking about is inhalation botulism, but some of the other types may include waterborne and lactogenic botulism, which is like a cosmetic from Botox. All right, so food botulism is spread by consuming contaminated food with the botulism toxin or spores. Common foods that have the botulism toxin or spores in it are inadequate home canned foods. Interestingly enough, the toxin botulism cannot survive on or in foods with a pH level of 4.5 or lower. So you will never be contaminated by botulism from acidic foods, like oranges or any of that type. Infant botulism occurs when an infant, usually 6 months or younger, ingests Clostridium botulinum. They haven't developed the body's natural defenses that protect them from this bacterium, so as they digest it, the bacteria multiply and produce the toxins. Two of the main sources that infants receive this from is honey and corn syrup. Wound botulism occurs when contaminated soil or gravel enters a wound. Also, intravenous drug users are also susceptible to wound botulism as well. And then lastly, inhalation botulism is caused when the toxin is inhaled into our lungs. It does not occur naturally, though. It happens from events such as bioterrorism.
Hi, I'm Maria Gunderson, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the etiology and the reservoir of the disease botulism. So here we go. So on this first slide, we're going to be talking about botulism's etiology. It's caused by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum. There are also two other bacteria that cause it on occasion, and those are Clostridium butyricum or Clostridium barati. But those two are a lot more rare, so it's probably most important that you remember Clostridium botulinum is the one that causes Clostridium. Clostridium botulinum is gram-negative. You can tell in the picture on the slide that it's gram-negative because it's stained a dark purple color as opposed to the red that you would normally see if it was a gram-positive bacterium. And so by the gram stain we know that The cell wall has a thick peptidoglycan layer, and that absorbs more of the gram stain, so it's dark purple. This next slide is more of botulism's etiology, talking more about like the shape and its structure. So the shape of Clostridium botulinum is oblong and thin like a rod, as you can see in the pictures, so it is considered to be bacillus. It's motile, which means it's able to move. It moves through the use of flagella, and you can see that in the picture on the bottom. In the picture on the top, you can very clearly see another of the structures found on Clostridium botulinum, which is an endospore. The endospore makes the bacterium look a little like a microphone or something. The endospore is able to help it survive in adverse conditions. The bacterium itself is not usually dangerous, but the spore is able to produce harmful toxins in certain conditions, which we will talk about on the next slide. Okay, so this slide we're going to go over the reservoir of botulism. The Clostridium botulinum bacteria it's a very common bacteria to find in many places. It's found in mostly in like dirt and agricultural products. It's also been found in animal intestines, most commonly in fish and other seafood. But for how common it is, it rarely causes the disease botulinum. They're most often found as inactive spores on the surface of things like fruits and vegetables, seafood, and canned food. These spores cause no harm unless they are activated, which will cause them to release neurotoxins that are harmful to humans as well as animals, and cause the disease known as botulism. And there are 7 different toxins that they can create, which are distinguished with the letters A through F. The endospores are created to preserve the bacteria in adverse conditions, but when they become active again and conditions are right, they will release these toxins. Clostridium botulinum are anaerobic, meaning they thrive in areas with little or no oxygen, which explains why they can become active and release toxins in conditions where oxygen is limited. Some of the other conditions that could affect this includes areas with low acidity, low sugar, low salt, a certain range in temperature, and correct amounts of water. The production of these toxins is a defense mechanism. The bacterium is protecting itself from things like intense heat, acidity, and other damage. So basically, the toxins are not harmful, or the bacterium is not harmful until it releases these toxins, and then they are harmful to us as humans, and those toxins are most often found in things like home canned, preserved, or fermented foods that weren't processed correctly, which can provide these conditions for the bacteria. So you need to be careful around those different foods because they can cause the disease botulism.
Hi, this is Katie, and I'm going to be talking about treatment, prevention, and control for botulism and its different forms. The treatment for foodborne botulism starts with clearing the digestive system, and physicians will usually do this by inducing vomiting and or bowel movements with medication. They then will use an antitoxin injection to help prevent the spread, and although that cannot prevent the damage that has already been done or help it, it will prevent further infection. They also use that in wound botulism. Along with wound botulism, they'll prescribe antibiotics. That is to help prevent further infection. They also use wound care to help prevent further infection in the wound. For inhalation botulism, it's a little bit more serious, and you usually end up in the hospital on a mechanical ventilator, and after will receive therapy to restore functions. For prevention, it's important that when you're canning at home to use proper canning techniques, and for this you use a pressure cooker and you pressure cook the food before canning, and then you can also boil your food before serving it. It's also important to prepare and store food safely. Never eat preserved food from a bulging container, as that can show signs of botulism that has grown. Do not store potatoes that you've already baked in tin foil at room temperature. And then also store your oil that are infused with garlic and or herbs in the refrigerator. To prevent infant botulism, never feed a baby under the age of 1 year honey, not even the tiniest bit. It's just not worth the risk. And then to prevent wound botulism, it's pretty rare to see this from the day-to-day cut. So it's mostly seen with injection or inhaled street drugs. So just stay away from those. And then for control of botulism with wound care, you drain and remove dead tissue from the wound to prevent further infection. And then the medical staff usually takes just usual precautions and make sure to wash their hands. They don't need to be isolated or quarantined from the patient, but usually public health administrators will get involved and they'll investigate the botulism case and dispose of the contaminated food.
Hi, my name is Cherie, and I'm going to give you some additional information about botulism. The foodborne variety of the disease, botulism, was the first form to be identified, and there are approximately 1,000 reported annual cases of botulism worldwide. In Europe, the type B toxin contamination of home processed meats is the most prevalent. Alaska, Canada, and Japan, the type E toxin in preserved seafood is the most prevalent. In China, the type A toxin in home processed bean products is the most prevalent. Thailand recently had a prevalence of home preserved bamboo shoots being responsible for botulism. And in the United States, home canned vegetable products like asparagus, green beans, and peppers is responsible for most foodborne botulism here. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the top map is infant botulism cases in 2015, and the bottom map is foodborne botulism cases in 2015, both in the United States. Death from botulism is usually due to respiratory failure. However, with the antitoxin and proper medical treatment, less than 5 out of every 100 people with botulism die now. It used to be about 50 years ago, 50 out of every 100 people with botulism would die. So that makes the current fatality rate of foodborne botulism about 5 to 10% a year in developed countries, and that's higher in countries without as much medical advancement. The current fatality rate for infant botulism is 2%, and unfortunately, infant botulism is the most prevalent form of the disease in the United States. There is a slight risk of allergy or hypersensitivity reaction to the antitoxin, about 9% risk there. And like we said before, botulism thankfully is not contagious or transmissible. Something fun or interesting I wanted to share about botulism is that the type A toxin produced by Clostridium botulinum actually makes for the toxin used in Botox by pharmaceutical companies. They use that toxin in very, very small doses to weaken and paralyze certain muscles or block certain nerves in the body. It's most commonly known for cosmetic reasons by temporarily smoothing wrinkles, but doctors can use that toxin in very small doses to treat other health problems like hyperhidrosis, overactive bladder, chronic migraine, and some others like you can see. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about Botox. And we have a couple references there. Have a good day.